The world of the late 15th century was a tapestry of shifting power. Kings and popes believed they held the threads. They were wrong. In the cold heart of winter, a new kind of power was gathering. It did not seek crowns or consecrated thrones. It sought something far more enduring. It sought control. In the labyrinthine canals of Venice, a city built on water and secrets, a meeting was called. This was no ordinary diplomatic summit. It was a convergence of shadows, a clandestine gathering of the world's most ambitious families. They came from the banking halls of Florence, the merchant houses of Germany, the gold-rich kingdoms of West Africa, and the silver-laden mountains of the New World. Each represented a dynasty, a legacy of wealth and influence built over generations. Their host was Marco Contarini, a Venetian nobleman whose family secrets were as deep and dark as the canals themselves. He understood that the old ways of power were becoming obsolete. The discovery of new continents and the explosion of global trade routes were changing the world forever. To survive, and more importantly to rule, a new strategy was needed. An alliance that transcended national borders, religious doctrine, and royal decrees. He envisioned a network bound not by fealty to a king, but by the pursuit of mutual profit and power. A pact that would operate in the spaces between empires, invisible and untouchable, shaping the course of history from the shadows. This was the dream that brought them to the darkened palazzo. The guest list was a testament to this audacious vision. Lorenzo de' Medici, the magnificent ruler of Florence, a man who balanced art and politics with the cold calculus of his family's bank. Jakob Fugger, the German magnate whose financial empire could make or break emperors, a man for whom gold was the only true religion. They represented the old heart of European power, men accustomed to influencing kings and cardinals. But Marco's vision extended far beyond the shores of the Mediterranean. He had invited outsiders, figures whose very presence was a challenge to the established European order. They were the key to a truly global network, the missing pieces in a puzzle of immense power and wealth. From the shadows of the chamber emerged figures of even greater consequence. Kwame Asantehene, an emissary from the golden kingdoms of West Africa, represented a source of wealth that dwarfed European treasures. He spoke not just of gold, but of ancient traditions and knowledge that predated the Roman Empire. Alongside him was Esperanza Cortés, a woman of copper skin and silver hair who controlled the vast silver mines of the Americas. Her family's fortune was so immense it could destabilize entire economies. Their arrival signaled a fundamental shift. This was not a European alliance seeking to dominate the world. This was the world's power brokers coming together to create a new order, one where the old rules The air in the Venetian chamber was thick with more than just incense. It was heavy with ambition and the scent of revolution. Marco Contarini laid out his proposal, a vision as bold as it was dangerous. He spoke of shared information, pooled resources, and a network of trade and finance that would bypass the authority of kings and popes entirely. It was a declaration of independence from the old powers, a world where their families, united in a secret covenant, would be the true sovereigns. They would not conquer nations with armies, but control them through their economies. They would own the flow of gold, silver, and information, the very lifeblood of the emerging global age. This was the promise, an empire of influence built on profit. This proposed alliance, however, was to be sealed with more than just parchment and promises. Marco understood that such a pact required a bond stronger than any legal contract. It needed a commitment that was absolute and terrifying in its implications. He spoke of blood oaths, a primal ritual to bind their families together for centuries. But even blood was not the ultimate guarantee. He revealed the deepest secret of Venice's ancient families, their access to powers that defied mortal understanding. He spoke of guardians, ancient supernatural entities bound to protect the interests of their masters. These were not mere superstitions, but a form of insurance policy with teeth, ensuring loyalty through fear of a fate worse than death. The proposition was staggering. It was a pact that mixed the cold logic of banking with the dark arts of sorcery. It offered unimaginable wealth and power, but at a cost that troubled even these hardened men and women of the world. Lorenzo de' Medici, master of Florentine politics, hesitated at the thought of binding his fate to foreign powers and occult forces. Jacob Fugger, the pragmatist, scoffed at superstition, but could not ignore the allure of controlling the world's gold and silver. The pact forced them to confront the limits of their own ambition and to decide if they were willing to step beyond the known world of finance and into a realm of ancient magic and blood rites. Ultimately, the promise was too great to refuse. The allure of shaping history, of building a dynasty that would last 1,000 years, was irresistible. The world was in flux, and in times of great change, fortunes are made by the bold, not the cautious. They agreed to the covenant, a pact forged in the heart of Venice that would stretch its invisible tendrils across the globe. By mixing their blood upon the parchment, they were not just forming a business alliance, they were creating a new dynasty, a hidden empire. They were awakening ancient guardians and setting in motion a chain of events that would define the next century, binding their descendants to a The air in the Venetian palazzo grew still, the silence broken only by the distant lapping of water against ancient stone. Marco Contarini held the ornate dagger aloft, its blade a sliver of darkness in the candlelight. This was the moment of commitment, the point of no return. The pact was more than a business arrangement. It was a sacred, irrevocable vow. He explained that the ritual was as old as Venice itself, a tradition passed down through the Contarini line from a time when magic was as real as commerce. The blood was not merely symbolic, it was a conduit, a medium through which their intentions would be bound to forces that would enforce them. Each drop would be a signature on a contract that could not be burned or torn, a pledge witnessed by powers that existed long before any of their families rose to prominence. The weight of this history filled the room, making the air thick and heavy. With a steady hand, Marco drew the blade across his own palm. He did not flinch as a line of dark crimson welled up, a stark contrast to his pale skin. He held his hand over the parchment, letting the droplets fall onto the vellum. The blood spread like a living thing, forming a dark, intricate stain at the center of the document. I, Marco Contarini, he declared, his voice resonating with ancient authority. Bind my house, my fortune, and my descendants to this covenant. By the gold that builds cities, by the blood that forges dynasties, and by the guardians who watch from the shadows, I pledge my loyalty. His words hung in the air, each one a brick in the foundation of their new world order. The act was done, a personal sacrifice that demanded an equal commitment from the others. One by one, the others stepped forward, their initial skepticism giving way to a solemn understanding of the ritual's gravity. Lorenzo de' Medici, ever the pragmatist, was next. He took the dagger from Marco, his expression a mixture of resolve and apprehension. His cut was precise, the act of a man who calculates every risk. As his blood joined Marco's, he spoke of Florence and the Medici legacy, his voice firm. Jakob Fugger followed, his German prayers a low murmur as he made his own offering, his merchant's mind now fully invested in this supernatural hedge fund. Then came Kwame Asante Hene. He took the dagger but spoke words in a language that none of the Europeans understood. His voice a deep baritone that seemed to make the very stones of the palazzo hum in sympathy. His blood, dark and rich, merged with the others, adding another layer of ancient power to the pact. Finally, it was Esperanza Cortez's turn. She approached the table with a regal grace, her silver eyes reflecting the candlelight with an unnerving intensity. She took the dagger, not with hesitation, but with a look of fascination, as if she were a scholar examining a rare artifact. How wonderfully primitive, she whispered again, a faint smile playing on her lips. She made her cut with a flourish, her blood completing the circle on the parchment. With the silver of the mountains and the secrets they hold, the House of Cortez joins this pact. As her blood touched the vellum, the combined stains seemed to shift and swirl, the edges darkening as if seared by an unseen fire. The pact was sealed. 5 dynasties from 4 corners of the known world were now bound by a single blood-soaked promise. With the ritual complete, a profound shift occurred in the room. The tension of the oath gave way to the charged energy of immediate action. The pact was no longer a theoretical proposal. It was a living entity, and it was hungry. The blood on the parchment was barely dry when the first dividends of their new alliance began to manifest. It started with Esperanza, her eyes still fixed on the bloodstain, as if reading a map. "My ships do not just carry silver," she announced, her voice crisp and businesslike. "They carry whispers. The Spanish court is in turmoil over Columbus's latest reports. They need funds for further exploration, and they are becoming careless with their secrets." She detailed the political infighting, the rivalries, and the financial strains within the Spanish monarchy, information more valuable than any single galleon of treasure. Jakob Fugger, his practical nature reasserting itself, immediately saw the opportunity. "Good," he grunted, the merchant in him overriding the man who had just participated in a blood ritual. "The Spanish crown owes my family a significant sum. This information gives us leverage." He, in turn, offered his own currency of knowledge. "My agents in the German states report that the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian, is planning a new tax to fund a war against the French. The German princes are furious. There is dissent that can be cultivated." He laid out a complex web of alliances and resentments within the empire, identifying key figures who could be influenced, bribed, or pressured. The map of Europe was no longer just a collection of kingdoms. It was a ledger of debts and opportunities. Kwame Asantehene listened patiently, a serene smile on his face. When the Europeans had finished sharing their courtly gossip and political intrigues, he offered perspective that dwarfed theirs in scope. Your kings squabble over patches of land, he said, his voice calm but firm. My caravans cross a continent. They bring me news from Cairo, from the Ottoman court, from the kingdoms of the interior. I know which salt mines are failing, which gold routes are threatened by desert raiders, and which local rulers are seeking new allies. He spoke of a network that operated on a scale the others could barely imagine, a flow of information that followed the ancient trade winds, completely invisible to the powerful monarchies of Europe. He revealed that the Ottomans were planning a naval expansion that would threaten Venetian trade, a piece of intelligence that made Marco Contarini sit up straight. This was the true power of the Venetian Pact. It was not just about pooling gold and silver, it was about creating a shared consciousness, an omniscience that no single king or empire could ever hope to achieve. Each member possessed a piece of the global puzzle, and by assembling them, they could see the whole picture. They could anticipate market shifts, predict political upheavals, and position themselves to profit from chaos before it even began. The blood on the parchment was the seal, but information was the true currency of their newfound power. In that candlelit room, they were no longer just bankers or merchants. They were the architects of the future. The ink of their new intelligence network was still wet when I, Marco Contarini, proposed our first joint venture. There is a war brewing, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. France and the Habsburg lands are on a collision course over Italy. It will be a long and costly conflict. For the kings and princes of Europe, this was a matter of honor, territory, and dynastic pride. But for us, the members of the Pact, it was the perfect business opportunity, a chance to test the strength of our new alliance, and honestly, to reap immense profits. The beauty of our plan was its brutal simplicity. We would not choose a side. We would finance both. This was a radical departure from the traditional model of patronage, where a banking house would back a single monarch and rise or fall with their fortunes. Lorenzo de' Medici, whose family had long navigated the treacherous waters of Italian politics, immediately grasped the genius of the strategy. We will offer loans to both King Charles VIII of France and Emperor Maximilian, he said, already calculating interest rates and collateral in his mind. We will use Jakob's connections to approach the Habsburgs and Esperanzas, to discreetly fund the French through Spanish intermediaries. By funding both sides, we were not just hedging our bets, we were ensuring our victory, no matter the outcome on the battlefield. The winner would be indebted to us, forced to grant trade concessions and favorable terms. The loser would be desperate, willing to sign away anything for the funds to rebuild, making them even more dependent on our financial power. Kwame Asante Kaney added another layer to the plan, showing just how far our reach could extend. Wars require more than gold, he noted. They require resources: iron for swords, horses for cavalry, grain for soldiers. My networks can control the supply of these goods, directing them to both armies at a significant markup. Esperanza Cortez agreed, adding, "And my silver will be used to pay the mercenaries who will fight on both sides. We will profit from their recruitment, their payment, and their equipment." So we would not just be the bank for the war, we would be the quartermaster, the logistics expert, and the arms dealer. We would control the conflict from every conceivable angle, turning the battlefields of Europe into a vast and frankly profitable extension of our balance sheets. This was the true meaning of the pact forged in blood, an engine designed to convert chaos into capital. While young men died in the mud for the glory of their kings, 5 families would be safe in their palazzos and counting houses. Our wealth growing with every cannon shot and cavalry charge. It was a cold, ruthless, and brilliant strategy. As we finalized the details, dividing responsibilities, and setting up channels of communication, the first light of dawn began to creep into the Venetian sky. We had spent the night carving up the future of Europe. Our first undertaking was set. The war would begin when we decided it was most profitable, and it would end only when we had extracted all the value we could from the bloodshed. As the conspirators prepared to depart, our business concluded, I raised one final crucial point. The conversation shifted from the tangible world of gold and war to the ephemeral, yet far more dangerous, realm of our supernatural insurance. Our success will breed envy and rivalry, I warned. The great families who were not invited tonight, the church, even kings themselves, will eventually sense our influence. They will try to uncover our secrets and destroy us. I walked over to a heavy, wood-carved cabinet, the air around it feeling colder than the rest of the room. Wealth can be stolen, contracts can be broken, but our guardians, they offer a different kind of security. I spoke of them not as servants, but as ancient, hungry things, bound by pacts far older than our own. Opening the cabinet, I revealed not treasure, but a collection of strange, unsettling artifacts. A shard of obsidian that seemed to drink the light, a leather-bound book with no visible title, and a small, intricately carved box of bone. The old families of Venice made bargains centuries ago, I explained. We offered them anchor in this world, a source of sustenance. In return, they offer their protection. They are watchers, hunters, enforcers. They do not care for morality, only for the sanctity of the bargain. The story of the Genoese spy was not a boast, but a demonstration. The spy had not been killed by a human assassin. He had been claimed by a guardian, a fate I implied was far worse than a simple death. The guardians were our ultimate deterrent. This revelation cast a new light on the entire alliance. The others had dealt with power their whole lives, but this was something else entirely. It was one thing to manipulate markets and kings, quite another to command entities that defied the laws of nature. Lorenzo scoffed, calling it superstition, but his voice honestly lacked conviction. Kwame Asantehene, however, looked on with knowing eyes. He recognized the nature of these bound spirits, understanding both their power and their inherent danger. You play a perilous game, Venetian, Kwame said softly. Binding such beings is not the same as partnering with them. A hungry dog on a leash is loyal only until it sees a way to break free and devour its master. His warning was a subtle reminder that the African powers he represented had a different, perhaps wiser, relationship with the spirit world. Despite the palpable fear in the room, the allure of such absolute protection was undeniable. This was the final piece of our empire, a secret police force that could not be bribed, a weapon that left no evidence, a terror that could cross any border and enter any locked room. It was the ultimate guarantee of our security and the ultimate seal on our pact. As we left the palazzo, disappearing into the morning mists of Venice, we were no longer just a consortium of powerful families. We were now masters of ancient beings, keepers of a dark secret that both protected and threatened us. The blood on the parchment had not just sealed a deal, it had awakened the guardians, and their hunger for service would now shape the actions of the Pact for centuries to come. Three months after the blood oath in Venice, the Pact's influence began to seep into the foundations of European power, starting with the very heart of the Church. In Florence, Lorenzo de' Medici conducted his affairs with a newfound audacity. His family's bank, already a formidable institution, was now backed by forces that transcended mere finance. His first major test came in the form of a visitor robed in scarlet and ambition. Cardinal Alessandro Borgia, a cardinal, a man whose spiritual authority was matched only by his worldly appetites, had come seeking a loan for the Pope's latest grandiose project, expecting the usual favorable terms granted to the Holy See. He found instead a changed Lorenzo, one who no longer bowed to the Church's demands but dictated his own terms from a position of unassailable strength. Lorenzo set down his quill, his eyes glinting with the cold light of calculation. "The terms have changed, Your Eminence," he stated calmly, the words carrying the weight of our Pact's combined might. He spoke of new partners, of expanded opportunities, and of interest rates that reflected a new global reality. The Cardinal, accustomed to treating bankers as glorified treasurers for the Vatican, was taken aback. Lorenzo presented the Pact not as a simple financial alliance, but as a comprehensive service provider offering information, protection, and resources stretching from the goldfields of Africa to the silver mines of the New World. It was a power network that operated beyond the Vatican's reach, and more disturbingly, beyond its comprehension. Lorenzo was no longer just a banker, he was the local representative of a hidden empire. The conversation was subtly underscored by a new, unnerving element. Lorenzo spoke of spiritual insurance policies, a veiled reference to the guardians. He hinted at connections to powers that predated the authority of St. Peter, forces that did not recognize the sanctity of the cloth. This was a direct challenge, a quiet declaration that the Medici Bank was now protected by something far more ancient and ruthless than the Swiss Guard. The Cardinal, a man well versed in the dark arts of politics and power, felt a flicker of genuine fear. He was being told that the old rules of divine right and papal authority no longer applied, and that the financial world now answered to a higher or perhaps lower power than his own. Just as the Cardinal was processing this new reality, word arrived of a direct threat to Medici interests. The rival Pazzi family, old Florentine competitors, were spreading malicious rumors in Rome, attempting to undermine Medici solvency and curry favor with the Vatican. In the past, this would have been a matter for lengthy political maneuvering, or, at worst, a back-alley assassination. But for the new Lorenzo, it was merely an opportunity to demonstrate the Pact's efficiency. A cold smile touched his lips. The Pazzi family would receive a correction, he assured the cardinal, but not the kind they expected. It would be a lesson in the new way of the world, a demonstration of how the Pact dealt with competition swiftly, silently and decisively, turning liabilities into assets. While Lorenzo managed the politics of the South, Jacob Fugger applied the Pact's principles to the fractured heart of the Holy Roman Empire. From his counting house in Augsburg, a city built on German silver and trade, Jacob orchestrated a different kind of conquest. He was a man of numbers, not sorcery, yet he understood that fear was a currency as potent as gold. His primary targets were the proud, independent German princes, constantly warring amongst themselves and perpetually short of funds. He saw them not as rulers to be courted, but as volatile assets to be acquired and controlled. His methods were a masterclass in financial warfare, now amplified by the Pact's global intelligence network. Jacob's strategy began with information provided by his new partners. He knew which mines were faltering, which harvests were failing, and which alliances were fraying before the princes themselves did. Armed with this knowledge, he would extend generous loans, allowing them to raise armies and pursue their petty ambitions. He became their savior, the ever-reliable source of capital in a world of uncertainty, but the chains of debt he forged were stronger than any iron. He embedded his own agents within their courts as financial advisors, slowly taking control of their tax revenues, mining rights, and trade tariffs as collateral. Princes believed they were gaining power, while in reality they were becoming prisoners in their own gilded cages, their sovereignty slowly bleeding onto Fugger's ledgers. The supernatural element of the Pact was something Jacob used with extreme reluctance, but with devastating effect. He had no taste for Marco's theatrical displays, but he recognized the value of a well-placed whisper, and a particularly stubborn duke refused to grant him control over a vital silver mine. Jacob did not send soldiers. Instead, he arranged for a Venetian trade delegation to visit the Duke's castle. The delegates spoke of favorable terms, but their eyes held a cold emptiness, and strange, unsettling occurrences followed in their wake. Livestock died mysteriously. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, and the Duke himself was plagued by nightmares of being hunted by skeletal figures with eyes of glowing ember. The Duke's resistance crumbled, and the mine was signed over to Fugger's control without a single drop of blood being shed. This was the Fugger Gambit, a quiet, systematic takeover of the German states from within. He used the Pact's financial might to create dependency and its supernatural arm to crush resistance. While Lorenzo played games with cardinals and rival families in the sunlit squares of Italy, Jacob worked in the colder, grayer world of German politics, building a silent empire of debt and fear. He was creating a network of puppet states whose resources and soldiers would ultimately serve the Pact's interests, not their own. Each loan, each contract, each whispered threat was another link in the chain, binding the heart of Europe to the will. In Venice, the architect of the Pact, Marco Contarini, focused on perfecting the art of intimidation. His city, a crossroads of global trade, was rife with competitors. Genoese, Ottoman, and Portuguese merchants all vied for control of the lucrative trade routes that were the lifeblood of the Venetian Republic. Before the Pact, this competition was managed through tariffs, espionage, and the occasional naval skirmish. After the Pact, Marco employed a far more effective tool, the Venetian Veil, a campaign of psychological warfare designed to make rivals simply disappear. He used the Guardians not as a weapon of last resort, but as a primary instrument of market control, ensuring that Contarini's ships sailed without competition. The process was subtle at first. A rival merchant, planning to undercut Contarini prices on spices from the Levant, would find his warehouse infested with rats that seemed unnaturally intelligent and malevolent. Another, who tried to poach a key ship captain, would find his ledgers mysteriously catching fire in a locked stone room. These incidents were always deniable, dismissed as unfortunate accidents or bad luck. But the whispers began to circulate in the taverns and on the docks. To cross the house of Contarini was to invite a curse. The stories were fueled by Marco's agents, who spread rumors of ancient pacts and shadowy protectors that guarded Venice's oldest families. The fear was more effective than any fleet of warships. When subtlety failed, the Guardians were unleashed more directly. A prominent Ottoman trader who refused to cede control of a critical trading post in Alexandria woke to find strange, web-like patterns of frost on his windows despite the Egyptian heat. That night, his guards were found in a stupor, and the trader himself vanished from his locked bedchamber, leaving behind only a single, perfectly preserved black feather on his pillow. No body was ever found. The message to his associates was clear and terrifying. The Contarini family's reach was not limited by geography, and their enforcers were not bound by mortal laws. The trading post was abandoned within a week, and its control ceded to Marco's agents. This strategy allowed Marco to consolidate power in Venice and across the Mediterranean with remarkable speed and efficiency. He projected an aura of untouchable power, his influence shielded by a veil of superstition and terror. While Lorenzo managed politicians and Jacob managed princes, Marco managed the flow of goods and information. That was the foundation of their entire enterprise. He ensured that the Pact's investments were secure and its trade routes were clear, not by building better ships or offering better prices, but by making the very idea of competing with them unthinkable. The Venetian Guardians, hungry for service, while the European members of the Pact reveled in their newfound power, manipulating markets and intimidating rivals. The true source of much of their wealth lay far to the south, under the vast ancient skies of Africa. In the legendary city of Timbuktu, a nexus of trade and scholarship, Kwame Asantehene and his associate, Amara Songhai, viewed the Pact's activities with a different perspective. They saw the Europeans as powerful but short-sighted, like children playing with sharp, dangerous tools they did not fully understand. For Kwame and Amara, power was not about frantic acquisitions and brutal displays. It was about the deep, steady, and patient control of the source. Their gold was the river that fed the European economies, and they watched the downstream squabbles with a calm, knowing wisdom. The caravans that arrived in Timbuktu were not just laden with salt, ivory, and textiles. They were living arteries of information, carrying news from across the continent long before it reached any European ear. Amara, brother to the emperor of the Songhai Empire, was the master of this network. His study was a testament to a different kind of global awareness. While Lorenzo mapped the political rivalries of Italy, Amara's maps charted the subtle shifts in desert trade winds, the health of distant herds, and the whispers of spirits in the deep jungles. He knew that the European lust for gold was an insatiable hunger, and he and Kwame were the ones who decided how, when, and at what price that hunger would be fed. They were the silent partners whose influence was as pervasive and invisible as the desert heat. Their strategy was one of profound subtlety. When Lorenzo requested gold to fund his continental wars, the gold was provided. But it did not flow through the newly established Patsy network or the Fugger banks. Instead, it was funneled through a complex, ancient web of African and Arab merchants, moving through Alexandria, Cairo, and even the Moorish ports of Spain. The Europeans received their capital, never realizing they were merely a small part of a much older and more sophisticated financial ecosystem. Amara and Kwame ensured that while the Pact's members profited, the greatest profits and, more importantly, the control remained firmly in African hands. They let the Europeans believe they were masters of the game, all while controlling the board itself. This approach extended to their understanding of the supernatural. The news of Venetian guardians and papal demons was received not with fear, but with a degree of academic concern. Kwame knew the nature of these bound entities. They were slaves, not allies. Powerful, yes, but also resentful and inherently unstable. They were a tool, and a tool could break or be turned against its wielder. The African connection to the spirit world was fundamentally different. It was not based on chains and compulsion, but on respect, partnership, and ancestral lineage. The Europeans were dabbling in forces they had only just discovered, while African wisdom was rooted in an understanding that stretched back to the dawn of humanity. To address the growing concerns about their European partners' reckless use of power, Amara led Kwame to a place of deep sanctity, a chamber hidden far beneath the bustling university. The stairs were carved from living rock, and the air grew thick with a palpable energy, humming with a power far older than the city above. The walls were not bare stone, but covered in intricate carvings and symbols that predated even the hieroglyphs of Egypt. This was a place where the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds was thin. A place of true communion. Amara lit torches that burned with an ethereal blue flame, illuminating an altar hewn from a single massive piece of obsidian. This was where they sought counsel not from spirits, but from ancestors. Amara knelt before the altar, speaking in a low, resonant tone. His words were not a summons or a command, but a respectful invitation. He spoke of the Pact, of the European ambition, and of the awakening of the bound guardians in Venice. He asked for wisdom, for guidance on how to navigate this alliance with partners who were both powerful and honestly, dangerously naive. In response to his call, the shadows in the chamber deepened and seemed to coalesce. From the darkness, two figures emerged, their forms indistinct at first, shifting like heat haze. They solidified into tall, regal beings with skin like polished jet and eyes that held the light of distant galaxies. These were not ghosts. They were the ancestors, the accumulated wisdom of their lineage made manifest. We have seen the ripples of their actions. One of the ancestors spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers that resonated directly in the mind. They have untethered hungry things. The Venetian guardians are remnants of a forgotten age, bound by crude pacts of blood and iron. They serve out of compulsion, and their loyalty is a fragile chain. The ancestors' words confirmed Kwame's fears. The European approach was a brute force method, lacking the finesse and understanding required to deal with such forces safely. It was like using a blacksmith's hammer to perform surgery, a display of strength that was bound to cause catastrophic damage. The ancestors saw the entire alliance as a delicate structure built upon a faulty and explosive foundation. The second ancestor offered guidance. Do not withdraw from them. Embrace them. Their ambition is a current. You must guide its flow, not stand against it. Their power is a fire. You must teach them to use it for light, lest it consume you all. The council was not to sever the connection, but to deepen it, to take on the role of teachers, join their games, learn their secrets, show them a glimpse of true power, power based not on slavery but on harmony. Let them see that their guardians are mere dogs, while we walk with lions. The ancestors' strategy was one of education and subtle domination. They would allow the Europeans to believe they were equal partners, all while guiding the Pact toward a future that aligned with their own far-seeing vision for the world. Returning to the sunlit world of the study above, Kwame and Amara were filled with a new sense of purpose. The ancestors' counsel was clear. They needed to demonstrate the difference between the African concept of spiritual partnership and the European model, spiritual servitude. The opportunity to do so was already presenting itself in the letters arriving by courier. Marco Contarini boasted of how his guardians had made a rival merchant vanish. Esperanza Cortez wrote of using mountain spirits to terrify her enemies. To Kwame and Amara, these were not signs of strength, but of a profound and dangerous immaturity. They were using cosmic forces for petty commercial disputes, accumulating a debt with the spirit world that would one day, surely, come due with interest. Amara took up his quill to compose a response, not just to one partner, but to all of them. His letter was a masterwork of diplomacy, woven with threads of fellowship and subtle warning. He congratulated them on their successes, praising their boldness and vision. He offered to expand their trade networks, suggesting new routes into the heart of Africa and toward the Far East, tantalizing them with the promise of even greater wealth. But buried within the warm words of partnership was a carefully placed seed of doubt. Your success with your guardians is impressive, he wrote, But be wary. Powers bound by force have long memories and harbor deep resentments. True strength lies not in the chains we forge, but in the alliances we build in every realm. This was the core of their philosophy. The ancestors did not serve them. They advised and protected the lineage to which they belonged. The spirits of the river and desert were not enslaved. They were respected partners in the balance of life, the cooperation earned through rituals of gratitude and mutual understanding. This created a stable, loyal, and infinitely more powerful spiritual foundation. The European guardians, on the other hand, were like angry caged beasts. They obeyed their masters for now, but they were always watching for a moment of weakness, a crack in the bars of their prison. Amara's letter was the first step in teaching his partners this crucial life or death distinction. To drive the point home, he ended his letter with a bold proposition. Our alliance has grown in wealth and power, but we remain separated by distance. I propose a summit. Let us all meet in a place of our choosing to discuss the future of our great enterprise face to face. This was more than a suggestion for a meeting. It was a challenge. It was a call to bring their respective powers, both mortal and supernatural, into one place. Amara and Kwame knew that when the Venetian guardians stood in the presence of the African ancestors, the difference between a slave and a king would become starkly, undeniably clear. The summit would be a test, a demonstration, and the next critical step in a The invitation to a summit sent ripples through the Pact. In Florence, Lorenzo de' Medici read the proposal with a calculating eye. A face-to-face meeting was risky. It exposed them all. But it was also an opportunity to solidify his own position as the political strategist of the group. He was intrigued by Amara's cryptic warnings about the Guardians, sensing a truth his own pragmatism had tried to ignore. In Augsburg, Jakob Fugger was suspicious. He distrusted anything that couldn't be entered on a ledger, and a grand meeting felt like an unnecessary extravagance. Yet, the promise of coordinating their financial strategies on a global scale was too tempting to dismiss. He agreed, already planning how to turn the summit to his financial advantage. In the Americas, Esperanza Cortés reacted with excitement. She was bored by the day-to-day management of her silver empire and craved the thrill of the game. The idea of a council of the world's shadow rulers, each with their own supernatural secrets, was irresistible. She saw it as the ultimate negotiation, a chance to measure her own power, both the silver from her mines and the mountain spirit she was learning to command, against the others. In Venice, Marco Contarini felt a flicker of unease. He was proud of his guardians, but Amara's letter had planted a seed of doubt. Was he truly their master, or just the keeper of their leash? The summit, he decided, would be the perfect stage to prove the supremacy of Venice's ancient protectors. The response from all corners was affirmative. The location was debated through coded letters, finally settling on a neutral, secluded island off the coast of Sicily, a place where Roman ruins mingled with Moorish architecture, a crossroads of the very cultures their pact now encompassed. Preparations began. Each member of the pact planned their journey, deciding who to bring, what resources to leverage, and what secrets to hold in reserve. This would be no simple business meeting. It was to be a convergence of dynasties, a congress of powers both seen and unseen. The fate of their 1,000-year reign could be decided in a single conversation. As he dispatched the final arrangements, Amara Songhai stood on a balcony overlooking Timbuktu, the setting sun turning the sky to gold and crimson. The ancestors had given their blessing. The stage was being set for a grand revelation. The Europeans believed the summit was about consolidating their control over the mortal world of trade and politics. They were mistaken. The true purpose of the gathering was to begin their education, to open their eyes to the vast and complex spiritual world they had stumbled into. It was an invitation to a higher level of the game, where the stakes were not just gold and land, but the very nature of power itself. The African connection was about to move from silent partner to active guide, whether the others were ready for it or not. Far from the political intrigues of Europe and the ancient wisdom of Africa, Esperanza Cortés commanded her own empire from the raw, bleeding heart of a mountain. The silver mines of Potosi, a sprawling wound in the high Andes, were the source of her family's staggering wealth, a torrent of silver that could make or break European economies, while Spanish viceroys and soldiers postured in the towns below, believing they controlled the New World's riches. Esperanza knew the true authority resided deep within the earth. She walked the dark, glittering tunnels, not as a conqueror, but as a warden of a powerful, slumbering entity. Her dominion was built on more than the labor of the indigenous workers. It was built on a dangerous and intimate relationship with the mountain itself and the ancient spirits that dwelled within its silver veins. The foreman, a grizzled Spaniard named Miguel, whose skin was permanently dusted with silver, brought her reports that went beyond simple production quotas. He spoke of rising output from newly discovered veins, but also of a growing unease among the native miners. They whispered of strange dreams in the suffocating darkness, visions that haunted their sleep. They saw shimmering serpents with eyes of gold slithering through the rock, and heard voices in the deep, speaking in languages older than the Inca Empire. Miguel, a man of faith and superstition, feared they had dug too greedily, awakening something that should have been left to sleep. Esperanza, however, heard these reports not as a warning, but as a confirmation. She was not just mining silver, she was mining power. Dismissing her foreman, she descended alone into the mine's deepest, most forbidden levels. Here, the air was cold and thin, and the only light came from the torch in her hand, which cast dancing shadows on walls that pulsed with a faint, silvery luminescence. The veins of raw silver were so pure they seemed alive, like the arteries of a slumbering god. This was her true throne room, a place far from the courts and counting houses of her partners, a place of primal power. She had felt the mountain's consciousness for years, a slow, patient awareness that watched the brutalities of the conquest with cold indifference. Now, armed with the knowledge of the Pact and the existence of other guardians, she had come not to plunder, but to parley. "I know you are here," Esperanza called out, her voice clear and steady in the profound silence of the deep earth. "I am not like the others who scar your skin for trinkets. I offer more than picks and shovels." She stood her ground, a solitary figure surrounded by immense silent power, making a proposition to the darkness itself. The world is changing. New alliances are being forged, binding men and spirits. Your slumber is over. The question is not if you will awaken, but with whom you will stand when you do. She was not just speaking to the mountain. She was extending an invitation, offering the ancient spirits of the Andes a seat at the table. The mountain answered her call. The response began not as a voice, but as a physical sensation, a precipitous drop in temperature that made her breath plume in the torchlight, and a low vibration that hummed through the soles of her boots. From the solid silver wall before her, a form began to emerge, coalescing from the glittering ore like mercury taking shape. It rose to its full height, a tall, androgynous figure whose skin shifted and flowed, one moment appearing as polished silver, the next as the dark stone of the mountain. Its eyes were twin pools of liquid obsidian, holding an intelligence that was ancient, patient, and utterly non-human. This was the Apu, the spirit of the mountain, a being of immense power and antiquity. You are the daughter of the invaders? The Apu spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers that seemed to echo from the very rock, the Spanish words laced with the cadence of old Quechua. Your people have bled this mountain for generations, taking its body and giving nothing but pain in return. You speak of partnership? Your audacity is as vast as the sky above this peak. The spirit's words were not angry, but filled with a deep, weary contempt. It saw her as just another in a long line of parasites, another fleeting mortal seeking to exploit a power that predated humanity. For centuries, it had watched the rise and fall of empires, and the Spanish were merely the latest and harshest masters. Esperanza did not flinch or apologize. To show weakness here would be fatal. My people are fools. They see only metal, a currency to fund their pointless wars and build their gaudy churches. They do not see you, she replied, her tone one of shared superiority. I am not them. I see the power that sleeps here. I see a force that could swallow armies and turn cities to dust. She stepped closer, holding the spirit's obsidian gaze. Your people are enslaved. Your temples are ruins, and your strength is dormant. I offer you a chance to touch the world again, not as a victim, but as a weapon. My alliance has awakened ancient things in the old world. It is time the new world answered. The Apu considered her words, its silvery form rippling. Esperanza's proposition was unlike any it had heard. She did not offer prayers or sacrifices, but a chance for relevance, for agency, for revenge. Esperanza pressed her advantage, pulling out the ornate dagger from the Venetian Pact. I am bound to others like you, guardians of gold and shadow, but they are distant. I offer a new pact, one of silver and spirit, bound here and now. She made a shallow cut on her palm, the crimson blood a shocking contrast against the silver light. My blood for your power, my ambition for your reach. Together, we will make the old world kneel, not before a Spanish king, but before the true power of this continent. The Apu reached out a silver hand, not to take the blood, but to feel the intent behind it, tasting her ambition on the cold mountain. The pact was sealed not with words, but with a silent understanding. The Apu of Potosi accepted Esperanza's offer, seeing in her a vessel for its power, a conduit through which it could finally influence the world beyond its stony prison. For Esperanza, this was a monumental victory. She had not just secured a guardian, she had forged a partnership that was uniquely her own. Marco Contarini had inherited his guardians. Kwame Asante Hene consulted with his ancestors, but Esperanza had, through sheer will and audacity, recruited a god. This fundamentally shifted the balance of power within the Venetian Pact. Her value was no longer just the silver she mined, but the immense, raw, and untamed spiritual power of an entire continent that she now commanded. Her first act as a partner to the Apu was to change the nature of her operations. The brutal exploitation of the indigenous miners ceased. Instead, under the guidance of the spirit, they became attendants, priests to the living mountain. Production did not falter, it increased as the Apu itself revealed new, richer veins of silver, guiding the workers to its treasures willingly. The silver that now flowed from Potosi was different. It was imbued with a subtle energy, a sliver of the Apu's own power. Every coin minted, every ingot shipped to Europe now carried with it a whisper of the mountain spirit, a tiny seed of new world power, planted directly into the treasuries and banks of the old world. This new currency gave Esperanza an unprecedented level of influence. She could now do more than just fund her partners. She could subtly influence those who held her silver. A Spanish official who used her coins to accept a bribe might find himself plagued by indecision and doubt. A German prince who hoarded her silver to fund his armies would find his soldiers growing listless and melancholic, dreaming of vast, empty mountainsides. It was a form of influence far more insidious and potent than Lorenzo's political maneuvering or Jacob's financial traps. She was not just trading in wealth, she was exporting a spiritual contagion, making the powers of Europe unconsciously subservient to her will and the will of her new ally. As she prepared for the upcoming summit, Esperanza felt a supreme confidence she had never known. Her partners would arrive, boasting of their accomplishments, a new banking acquisition, a manipulated war, a terrified merchant. They would speak of their guardians as fearsome pets. Esperanza would arrive with the silent, brooding power of the Andes at her back. She controlled the very substance that underpinned their global economy, and now that substance was her agent. The others thought the game was about controlling the flow of gold and silver. Esperanza was about to teach them that the real power lay in controlling the soul of the metal itself. The silver shadows of the new world were stretching long. The Venetian Pact, for all its power, was an unnatural alliance forged in ambition and sealed in secrets. As its influence grew, so too did the internal pressures that threatened to tear it apart. The first significant crack appeared not from an external enemy, but from within its own ranks. Jakob Fugger, the pragmatic German banker, grew increasingly wary of my methods. Fugger built his empire on calculable risk and tangible assets. He saw the Venetian guardians not as a strategic advantage, but as a volatile liability. He believed their use on rival merchants and politicians was reckless, drawing unnecessary attention and introducing an element of chaos that could not be controlled or entered onto a ledger. He feared I was becoming Addicted to the terror my guardians inspired, losing sight of our primary goal, profit. This internal friction was exacerbated by the growing threat from an institution the Pact had sought to control, the Church. Cardinal Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI, was no fool. He had felt the shift in power during his meeting with Lorenzo and saw the Pact's influence spreading like a shadow over Europe. The Church had its own intelligence network, its own ancient secrets, and its own guardians. From the deepest vaults of the Vatican, whispers of demonic pacts and ancient entities bound to the service of St. Peter began to circulate. The Pope, feeling his authority challenged, started to move his own pieces on the board. He declared a holy war on usury and witchcraft, a broad mandate that gave his inquisitors license to investigate the very foundations of the Pact's power, targeting the banks of the Medici and the trade of the Venetians under the guise of piety. The guardians themselves were becoming a source of instability. The entities bound to me and the spirits allied with Esperanza were not mindless tools. They were ancient, prideful beings with their own agendas. The Venetian guardians, fed by a steady diet of fear and violence, grew bolder and more demanding. They began to act on their own initiative, interpreting my desires in increasingly brutal ways, their actions becoming less like surgical strikes and more like indiscriminate rampages. In the Andes, Esperanza's Apu began subtly influencing her decisions, its cold, patient, mountainous perspective seeping into her own, making her more distant and contemptuous of her mortal partners and their petty European squabbles. The Pact's ultimate insurance policy was beginning to show signs of its own corrosive nature. The culmination of these tensions was the unanimous agreement to Amara Songhai's proposed summit. The meeting, initially suggested as a test by the African contingent, was now seen by all as a necessity. Lorenzo needed to coordinate a unified defense against the Pope's holy war. Jacob wanted to rein in my excesses and establish clearer rules of engagement for our supernatural assets. I sought to reassert my leadership and demonstrate the necessity of my guardian's power. Esperanza, meanwhile, saw it as a stage to unveil her true strength. The alliance, born in a dark room in Venice, was about to step into the light, and each member knew that this gathering would either solidify our covenant for a The chosen location was a deserted monastery on a windswept Sicilian island, a place that had seen Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and Normans all leave their mark. Its crumbling walls and mixed architecture served as a fitting backdrop for the meeting of a pact that spanned cultures and continents. The members arrived one by one, their retinues a reflection of their power. Lorenzo de' Medici came with a small army of secretaries and guards, projecting the authority of a prince. Jacob Fugger arrived on a ship laden with ledgers and strongboxes, a merchant king whose power was tangible and quantifiable. My gondola, seemingly out of place in the open sea, was crewed by men with dead, empty eyes, a silent testament to the nature of my protection. Esperanza Cortez arrived last, her ship a marvel of New World engineering, her presence radiating a cold, serene confidence that set the others on edge. Amara Songhai and Kwame Asantehene were already waiting for them, having arrived days earlier. They did not come with guards or treasures, but their quiet presence seemed to command the very stones of the monastery. They had prepared the meeting space in the monastery's roofless nave, open to the sky, a circle of simple stone chairs arranged around a central fire pit. The setting was intentionally primitive, designed to strip away the trappings of wealth and title and reduce us all to the core of our power. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ancient ruins, the 5 factions of the Venetian Pact gathered for the first and only time. The air was thick with unspoken questions and simmering resentments. The summit began with a tense civility. Lorenzo laid out the threat from the Vatican, detailing Pope Alexander's plans for a new inquisition aimed squarely at our financial empires. He proposed a unified front, a coordinated campaign of bribery, blackmail, and political pressure to neutralize the church. Jakob Fager countered, arguing that the Pope's aggression was a direct result of my flagrant use of dark powers. He demanded a moratorium on the Guardians' activities, proposing a more subtle, financially driven strategy. I scoffed at this, declaring that weakness in the face of the Church's threat would be suicide. I argued that now was the time for a demonstration of our full power to terrify the Pope into submission. As the arguments grew more heated, the very atmosphere of the island began to change. A cold wind whipped through the ruins, making the central fire sputter and hiss. The shadows cast by the crumbling walls seemed to deepen and writhe, and the distant sound of the sea took on a menacing, hungry tone. The Guardians, drawn by the presence of their masters and the scent of conflict, were gathering at the edges of the sacred space Amara had prepared. The skeletal figures of Venice lurked in the archways, their ember-like eyes fixed on the proceedings. From the direction of Esperanza's ship, palpable cold emanated and the air shimmered with a silvery light. The debate over mortal affairs was about to be interrupted by the forces we had unleashed. It was Amara Songhai who brought the simmering supernatural tension to a head. He rose from his stone seat, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the escalating anger of the Europeans. "You argue about the actions of your servants," he said, his voice cutting through the wind. "Perhaps it is time you heard from them directly." Before anyone could object, he began a low, resonant chant in a language that made the air vibrate. He was not summoning anything. He was merely opening a door, inviting the unseen to become seen. The central fire flared violently, its flames turning a deep spectral blue. The veil between worlds grew thin, and the true nature of their alliance was laid bare for all to see. The Venetian Guardians were the first to fully manifest, stepping from the shadows as tall skeletal beings wrapped in decaying finery. They radiated an aura of malice and insatiable hunger, their empty eye sockets fixed on Jakob Fugger with undisguised contempt. They were not loyal protectors. They were captive predators straining at an invisible leash. Simultaneously, the air around Esperanza Cortez grew heavy and cold as the silvery form of the Apu, the mountain spirit, shimmered into existence behind her. It was a being of immense ancient power, its obsidian eyes surveying the Venetian Guardians with a disdainful indifference, like a mountain observing insects. The raw, untamed power of the new world faced the decadent, corrupt power of the old. Just as the confrontation between the spirits threatened to erupt, Amara and Kwame completed their own invitation. The space behind them did not fill with a single entity, but with the majestic star-dusted figures of the ancestors. They were serene, regal, and radiated an authority that dwarfed the other spirits. The Venetian guardians recoiled as if burned, and even the proud Apu bowed its head slightly in a gesture of respect. The ancestors were not slaves or allies of convenience. They were the very source of their lineage's power, partners in a cosmic balance. Their presence instantly reframed the entire dynamic. The Europeans had brought their weapons. The Africans had brought their family. The silence that followed was absolute. In that moment, the Pact members understood the truth. Lorenzo saw that his political schemes were children's games. Jacob realized his ledgers could not account for the forces in play. Marco confronted the terrifying reality that he did not command his guardians. He merely fed them. Esperanza, for all her pride in the Apu, recognized a hierarchy of power she had not anticipated. It was Kwame Asantehene who finally spoke, his voice filled with the weight of the ancestors' wisdom. "This is our alliance," he said, gesturing to the assembled spirits. "A collection of hungry ghosts, a vengeful mountain, and the wisdom of ages. We must now decide if it is a tool for our mutual advancement or a weapon that will consume us all." The true summit had just begun. The Sicilian summit was not an end, but a new beginning. Faced with the stark reality of the powers they commanded, the five families were forced to evolve. The raw confrontation of their supernatural partners stripped away their illusions of control and replaced them with a sobering, pragmatic understanding. They forged a new covenant in the ruins of the monastery, one based not on the reckless ambition of their first meeting, but on the hard-won wisdom that true power required balance. They established a council, with the African contingent acting as mediators, to govern the use of their guardians and spirits. This act of unification, born from the brink of self-destruction, solidified the Venetian Pact into an entity that would endure not for a century, but for the 1,000 years they had dreamed of. Their legacy became the invisible architecture of the modern world, the patterns of global finance, the intricate dance of international capital, and the very idea of a multinational corporation can all trace their conceptual origins to the Pact's strategies. They perfected the art of funding both sides of a conflict, transforming war into the ultimate market opportunity, and ensuring their influence grew regardless of which flag was raised in victory. Their network of intelligence, which blended courier reports with supernatural whispers, was the precursor to the vast espionage agencies of later centuries. They did not rule nations with crowns and scepters, but by owning the debt, controlling the resources, and knowing the secrets of those who did. Over generations, the families adapted and evolved, their names changing, their methods modernizing, but their core purpose remaining the same. The Medici influence spread from banking into the political dynasties that shaped nations. The Fugger model of debt-based control became the blueprint for corporate takeovers and sovereign debt markets. The Contarini mastery of intimidation and information control found new life in media empires and technology firms that shaped public opinion. Esperanza Silva, infused with the mountain spirit, laid the foundation for a global economy where currency itself could be a subtle instrument of control. The Asantehene Songhai wisdom ensured the alliance's longevity, a quiet hand guiding the behemoth away from self-immolation. The 1,000-year reign they sought was achieved, though not as a visible empire. It was a dynasty of influence, a shadow government whose board members met not in palazzos, but in the untraceable ether of global finance and power. They became the quiet stakeholders in wars, revolutions, and the rise and fall of empires. They were the reason a South American nation defaulted on its loans. The Hidden Hand funded a technological breakthrough in Asia, and the silent partner behind a political upset in Europe. Their legacy was not written in history books, but in the unseen currents of power and wealth that continue to shape the world, a testament to the pact forged in blood and shadow so long ago. The endurance of the pact came at a profound and terrible cost, a price paid not just in gold, but in the very souls of the families bound to the covenant. The partnership with ancient, non-human entities was a generational curse as much as it was a blessing. The Contarini descendants found their lives steeped in paranoia and fear, forever looking over their shoulders for the shadows they commanded, their sleep haunted by the hungry whispers of the guardians who demanded constant service. The family became known for its reclusiveness and its members' unsettling empty eyes, men and women who lived in gilded cages, forever prisoners of their own protectors. The price of absolute security was absolute terror. The descendants of Esperanza Cortés bore a different burden. The Apu's influence, carried in their very bloodline, made them grow cold, distant, and detached from humanity. They saw the world from a mountainous perspective, viewing human lives and struggles as fleeting and insignificant. Their immense wealth isolated them, creating generations of brilliant but emotionally barren leaders who could manipulate markets with genius but could not form a genuine human connection. They were as rich as kings and as lonely as gods, forever bound to the cold, silver heart of the Andes. Their power was immense, but it cost them the warmth of the world, leaving them as hollow and glittering as the mines that birthed their fortune. For the families of Lorenzo de' Medici and Jacob Fugger, the price was a slow erosion of morality, a spiritual decay that spread through their lineage like a creeping stain. Each generation was forced into greater compromises, normalizing acts of betrayal, manipulation, and ruthless exploitation as simple business practices. They became masters of a world devoid of ethics, where human lives were entries on a balance sheet and wars were investment opportunities. The church they once sought to control became a tool they used with cynical precision, funding piety and corruption with equal measure. Their legacy was a world where the lines between right and wrong were irrevocably blurred for profit, a sin that compounded with every passing century. Ultimately, the greatest price was the loss of freedom. The descendants were born into the pact, their lives predetermined, their fates sealed by the blood oath of their ancestors. They inherited immense power and wealth, but they did not have the choice to walk away. The guardians and spirits were bound to the bloodline, not the individual. To renounce the pact would be to invite the wrath of these ancient beings, a fate far worse than death. They were the kings and queens of a secret world, but they were also its eternal prisoners, bound to a 1,000-year reign that offered everything except the simple liberty to choose a different. As centuries passed, the true nature of the Pact's power structure became clear. It was not a partnership of equals. The human families, for all their wealth and influence in the mortal world, were junior partners in a much larger, older enterprise. The true rulers of this unseen kingdom were the guardians, the spirits, and the ancestors. The humans were the hands and faces of the operation, the agents who moved through the physical world, but the strategic vision and ultimate authority rested with the entities they had awakened. The 1,000-year reign was not just the reign of the families, it was the re-establishment of an ancient spiritual order on earth, using humanity as its instrument. The African ancestors, with their vast wisdom, acted as the quiet sovereigns of this spiritual congress. They guided the Pact's trajectory with a patience that mortals could never comprehend, steering events not for quarterly profits, but for cosmic balance and the slow accumulation of their own influence. The Venetian guardians served as the enforcers, their hunger carefully directed to maintain order and eliminate threats. The Apu of the Andes acted as the treasurer, its power embedded in the very currency that fueled global economies, giving the unseen kingdom a direct physical presence in every corner of the world. The human members were managers, not masters, executing a business plan written in a language they could never fully read. This unseen kingdom operates to this day, its existence a secret whispered only in the highest echelons of power and the darkest corners of occult lore. It ensures its own survival by maintaining a delicate equilibrium, preventing any single nation or corporation from becoming powerful enough to threaten its overarching control. It fosters conflicts to create opportunities for profit and control, and it brokers peace when stability serves its larger interests. It is the ultimate invisible hand, guiding the chaotic dance of human history toward a future of its own design. The goals of this kingdom are not human. They are not concerned with progress, liberty, or happiness, but with sustenance, influence, and the continuation of their own timeless existence. The story of the Venetian Pact is therefore a cautionary tale. It is a reminder that in the pursuit of power, we may bargain with forces whose motives and timelines far exceed our own. The 5 families sought to control the world, and in doing so, they succeeded only in handing the keys to a kingdom they could never truly rule. Their 1,000-year reign is a testament to their ambition, but it is also the story of their subjugation. They built an empire of shadow, only to find that they were not its emperors, but merely its most privileged servants, forever bound to a dynasty of power where gold, blood, and ancient guardians still collide in the